I wanted to start off by saying what an honor and privilege it is to come with my team and share with you our journey from Edmonton Public Schools. I also want to say how grateful I am to be in Hawaii. My husband gave me an email this morning and indicated that we had a huge snowstorm with minus 30 degrees Celsius weather. So I'm very grateful to be here today. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our journey of becoming an empowered school district with Edmonton Public Schools. And my 15 minutes is going to be like Edmonton Public Schools speed dating. I'm going to walk you through about 20 years of becoming an empowered school district, and I wanted to highlight we have not arrived. And so, you know, if you believe that we're going to come here and tell you our lessons learned, I am not the speaker for you today. But we do have lots of things that we need to share. You know, things that ended up being great successes for us, but also things that you know, with good intentions, ended up being some roadblocks for us moving our culture forward to one of being empowered. I love the theme of inspiring, engaging, and empowering. And I really want to challenge you all today to make sure that you take this opportunity to reflect on your current system and figure out, is what we're doing working? If so, why? If not, did you hear anything from any of the speakers today that might allow you to engage in further conversations when you leave today? It always reminds me of a Margaret Mead quote when she talks about, never doubt that a small group of committed people can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that can. So my wish for you is that you leave today feeling empowered to really look at your system and how it can be the best system possible. So I think what unites us today, I mean, it's Thanksgiving. You guys celebrated that yesterday. You have a holiday, but you are here. And I think that is an indicator that we are jointly here because we want to promote excellence in public education. And I also think it's because we're passionate about transforming the lives of the students that we serve. And I think that needs to be the foundation that guides us as we think about next steps. You ultimately have that power, and never doubt that what you do every single day, no matter what your role, everybody's a leader, but everybody has that ability to transform the lives of one child or many children. I want to provide a little bit of an important context, and it came from our team. We wanted to make sure that you knew that every journey that you hear today is going to be a different journey. And that really is because Edmonton Public Schools has a different culture than what LA has, or what you have, or what Las Vegas has. And you know, knowing that there is no silver bullet, and that's the whole thing about empowerment. If there's a one size that fits all, that is not what empowerment is. So there isn't going to be a silver bullet, but there are going to be things that you say, oh, that might work for us because that fits our culture. That won't work for us because it won't fit our culture. So I think that's a real important concept. Remember that there always is calibration. So whatever you try when you leave here, whatever systems change happens, remember that it's not going to be right the first time. And then an empowered school district listens, and it gets feedback, and it continually modifies and changes. And you know, make sure that as it moves forward, it is adjusting based on the context and the changing realities. And also, I'm speaking from my perspective today, and perspective from a central office leader, but also a perspective from when I was a school principal and a teacher, and how it felt to live in a district like Edmonton Public Schools, who really is focused about empowerment. My colleagues might have very different opinions, and I embrace that and hope that that engages us in some dialogue. So further context, who are we? Edmonton Public Schools is the second largest school district in Alberta, and it's the sixth largest in Canada. Currently we have 202 schools, and each day 90,000 students come to our district to learn. I know that one of the speakers talked about 3 ways that they organize their schools, and I know somebody probably will talk about this in one of their TED Talks, but we organize our schools into catchment areas. where 50 schools report to an assistant superintendent, but they are grouped according to feeders. So elementaries that feed into junior highs, that feed into high schools, all work collaboratively together. And we found that structure has been pretty empowering as you try to figure out what works best for kids as they transition from one grade to another. It's also created, I think, a system where people really feel that they're our kids. It's not your kid in your classroom, they're all our kids, and the success is a collective responsibility. Foundational to Edmonton Public Schools, we do offer 30 alternative programs in our district, including visual and performing arts, athletics, faith-based programs, languages, cultural philosophies. And we'll talk a little bit about that later, but we are a concept that's very grounded in choice. And trying to look at what are the needs of our students, what are the hopes and aspirations of parents in the community, and how do we offer that under one big umbrella. There's some challenges with that, but we do very much believe in providing choice. There's not a lot of charter schools or private schools in Alberta, and I think that's because we've been able to do some successful stuff. We have community schools are the first guaranteed point of entry for all of our students. But within that concept of choice, inclusion isn't the only option. We also provide options with 18 other specialized supports and services that if parents wish to have a more specialized placement for their child, then we do accommodate that. And this is an important piece. We do not do this work alone. Edmonton Public Schools strategically engages on an ongoing basis with our 7,500 staff, and we do engage with our key stakeholders within our community. So now for the journey part. I'm going to talk and walk you through about it. As goes the superintendent, so goes the district. And so I'm going to walk you through a number of leaders that we've had in Edmonton Public Schools over the last 20 plus years. I'm starting with the superintendent just as a notion that leadership matters. And the vision and the ability to inspire and to set direction, in our district it does come from the superintendent, but it also comes from all leaders. And we have a very big belief that everybody in our school is a leader. And so while we have our superintendent that sets the overarching direction, we do have an expectation that we also are carrying and living out that vision collectively with our schools. So our journey from 1979 to 2014, and we're going to talk later in our keynotes a bit about what we have planned beyond. So I'm going to start off with everybody, probably, if they don't already know, Michael Strabitsky. And he was our superintendent starting way back in 1972 to 1994. And it wasn't until we were doing this presentation trying to highlight some things, that was a lesson learned. Mike Strabitsky was our superintendent for more than 20-some years. And I know he's known for, being the founder, the guru of site-based decision-making. But when Michael Strabitsky came in, his vision wasn't just about site-based decision-making. It really was about an empowered organization. And he had a vision of what he wanted to accomplish. And I think because he was with our district for 20-some years, he was able to establish that culture. And sometimes when superintendents shift and change, it's always a new start, a new beginning. But for 20 years under one leader, I joined Edmonton Public Schools in 1988, and for me, this is all I know. This is a culture, and I can't imagine any other way of working. But some of the big ideas that came from Mike was that concept of site-based decision-making, that idea that he had a clear idea of what the results were that he wanted to achieve, but he said, you know what, my results are your process. I don't care how you get there, you just need to get there. He really founded the notion of principle as decision maker. So some of the outcomes that were achieved is that, and I'm laughing at the gentleman that presented from Las Vegas. I think that frustration is what was the impetus for Mike. He was frustrated with, the fact that we had barriers, bureaucracy, policies in place that weren't allowing us to achieve the outcomes. So he said he's going to allocate dollars out to the schools or to the locations where the decisions were actually being made about students. So that had to be the classroom and the schools. He was very much a believer in stakeholder involvement and decision making. and really moved forward a balance between accountability but also flexibility, which has been, I think, a challenge that we've experienced on our journey for the last 20 years. So some of the lessons learned out of the site-based decision-making, I'll tell you as a principal, even as a teacher, I felt empowered. Every day that I went to work, I felt that I ultimately could make the decisions that were best going to move my school forward. And the power about the site-based decision-making is you have the local autonomy to say, here's the dollars that I've been allocated. And I'll give an example. In a school of about 300 years ago, I might have been given $3.5 million. And I was empowered to say, look at your results, look at your local context, and you make the best decisions with your staff and your community on what best is going to have the impact on student achievement. Student achievement was always the focus, and we've heard that through multiple presentations today. We were empowered to plan collaboratively with our staffs. Empowerment in site-based decision-making isn't about giving the dollars to the school principal and then having them decide. It was about creating that culture of empowerment. And it was that whole concept of tight ends, loose means. There were structures in place, but they were means-focused and allowed that flexibility at individual sites. And it really was about course services as well. Not all the dollars under Mike went out to the schools. There were some that were centrally located, and that was based on an ability to provide course services like professional development in a balanced and equitable way across schools. One of the accountability processes that was in place around site-based decision-making, students were always at the core. Priorities, our district has core priorities that guide decision-making, but each school and decision unit with their dollars was required to align to what the 3 priorities would be. And they were responsible for establishing a plan for how they were going to get there and measures for how they were going to demonstrate success. Didn't have to look the same, but they had to be in place. And then, after a plan was developed, we were encouraged to do our budget planning. Very different way of doing things. Plan and then allocate versus allocate and plan. It was about your plan and your needs driving the decision-making that needed to go around resources. And then every year, principals would all come together with the Board of Trustees and they'd have a results review, and they would be accountable for what their plans were, what their measures were, and how they achieved. And so there was flexibility, but there was also accountability built into the system. Our next superintendent was Emery Dosdall. And he came in 1995, and so foundational site-based decision-making and all of the ideas that Mike put in place, he shifted things a little bit. Parental choice was one of his big ideas, and that's what embarked us on a district of choice and developing alternative programs based on what parents needed. He flattened the organization. So he took out, we had a layer of assistant superintendents, and he wanted all of the schools to report directly to him. He really viewed principals as a CEO and an entrepreneur in their buildings, and he pushed even more dollars out. So half of our central office was cost recovery basis, so they had to get their money back to be fully operating, and others weren't. Some of the outcomes that were achieved as a result of that is that public education did become a big tent. And we did, we don't have, as I mentioned earlier, charters and a lot of charters and charters and private schools. There was a further shift to decentralization, which really started out as a franchise, kind of approach to education. There was, he started something called Quantum Leap, which he encouraged every principal in schools to do projects, innovative projects. And so there was this great creativity and nimbleness that was being created, but there was starting to see some silos that were emerging in central services. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I see the lessons learned about the concept of choice and flattening the organization. And this might be where my colleagues might disagree. We did have open boundaries, so parents could go to whatever school they wanted to. As our school district now grows and we have, population increases, that open boundaries is becoming a challenge for us. It did result in empowered parents. which is absolutely where we needed to go. That's probably one of the best outcomes that came out of this, is an empowerment of parents because they're part of an empowered school district. It did empower our principals. They felt like they were part of the central executive team. But I'm going to say an unintended consequence of that was that there was that middle management that was missing, and we started to see 202 schools off in their own direction. And so while I can see the rationale for doing that, there also are some lessons learned that we can talk a little bit later about. There needs to still be that tight ends, loose means. People having conversations with schools about what the non-negotiables are and allowing them the flexibility. If you take too much of that leadership out, I think you start to go and move away from what actually fundamentally keeps the district united and focused in a common direction to ensure transformation occurs. There was a lot of risk-taking, and you need a culture of risk-taking. You need people to be able to look at their data, try things, and if it fails, not feel like they're going to be punished for it. If they can demonstrate that they tried something, you know, that is a culture of risk-taking. But one of the challenges was we didn't put structures, or at that point in time, it was try anything. And if you don't have a way of measuring it or evaluating it, you can very quickly become a bandwagon district. And so, you know, you'll see some of the shifts that happened, you know, as I speak a little bit later. So then we moved to Angus Macbeth, who was our superintendent from 2000 to 2005. His shift, and I think it was getting back to, don't just do bandwagon, don't just try things, focus on what you know is going to make a difference. Focus on student achievement, focus on what research says are best practices for improvement. He really shifted the concept of principal as entrepreneur, as principal as instructional leader, and recognizing that the most important role in the school system is that of the classroom teacher. And so what do you do to enable and support your teachers to be able to do the best that they can do to transform the lives of their students? And so being in classrooms, knowing what you need to look for, what are the competencies that teachers need to be successful, that became a big shift. But some of the outcomes is that we did start to see data-driven accountability again. And that, you know, that's what we were missing. That's what Mike had established at the beginning. We were moving back towards that. When you start to create a system that they're piloting things, then they're looking at outcomes, there was a lot, and focused on what happens in the classroom, the doors were opened. Teachers were building collaboration teams. They were doing instructional walkthroughs, instructional talkthroughs, you know, getting schools across the district working collaboratively together. And so we started to see that isolation decrease and a culture of collaboration really emerging around what's important for kids. We started to see a greater standardization of process, and I'll talk a little bit in my next slide about that. But we started to feel top down. My results, my process. What happened was that great idea, and it was working and empowering, but then they started to say, but everybody needs to do it like this. And it should have these practices, and it should have this. And I'm going to be on, I can speak candidly, it started to create a culture that became one of mistrust. We had so many years of being empowered, you know, to do it our own way and hold tight to whatever those overarching, you know, non-negotiables were. This was foreign to us as a district, and people started to go underground, and people started to push back, and it wasn't the right intention. Everybody that leads makes decisions that they think are the best. Research says this, so we're going to ensure that everybody does this. But it did start to create the beginning of a toxic culture, and I hate using that term, but that was the perception of some people. Some of the things that happened during that time that were an impetus, and this came from our provincial government, is we had what started to create that culture of testing and trying things and focused on improvement was AC. And you know, you'll notice that significant amount of dollars were allocated across the province. 38 million the first year, 66 million in year 2, and then it, you know, similar amounts of money each year. And it was really about helping school districts create a culture of continuous improvement and really empowering them to improve student learning based on local initiatives. So that was also an impetus that superintendent, you know, grabbed hold of that helped, you know, to create the culture at that time. The improvement framework that they put forward, they're great ideas. You know, that was, like all schools, around the improvement framework, we talked about, look at your data. Determine what is it that if you were to focus on one thing would make the most difference for your kids. And so people were looking at the data and making those decisions. We were required to develop professional collaboration teams at the school that would say, okay, what is it that we need to do differently? What does research tell us what works? What best practices are we going to implement collectively and hold ourselves accountable for at the school level? They were required to create a targeted professional development plan to build expertise around those common and best practice areas. We were encouraged in schools to realign our resources to our instructional focus, and encouraged to create an internal accountability system so that we were measuring 6 to 8 weeks on an ongoing basis. How are your kids doing? How does that adjust what you need to do as you move forward? And we were also encouraged to engage families and communities around the instructional focus, with the last part being principals as instructional leaders. These, if they had remained, are overarching goals for schools to focus on, and giving them the flexibility to do whatever they wanted to do in those areas, I think we would have had a far greater impact. It's when we started to say what we needed to do around those areas that culture started to be created. As a result, though, and I'm just showing, because I was a principal my first year and I implemented the instructional focus framework, and when I first came in, you can look at my results. I was a brand new principal and I had a media frenzy out front my door saying we were second worst school in the province, and those were the results. So having an improvement focus and a framework that's based on what research says was a good thing, because when you look in 2 years, significant improvement in student achievement. And so some of the outcomes that we learned that I think are really positive, I'm gonna find my sheet here, pardon me. As a result of our leadership at that time, was that, well, I know what it is, there's only half my, we didn't get the whole presentation printed, was that there was a focus on results. And we heard that from a number of other presenters. Results and student achievement and transforming the lives of students has to be our focus. We really did build capacity around improvement that has, you know, stayed with our district now and into the future. We did see that thing about the shifting from bottom up to top down, which is a lesson learned about not engaging in that kind of behavior as we move forward. That whole concept of one size fits all absolutely was pushing back in the face of what we were trying to create in an empowered school district. And this is where we did start to see the cultural shifts. So then we move into our second last superintendent, and that was Edgar Schmidt. And Edgar Schmidt, really his big ideas were that everybody's in. And he really focused on creating an inclusive environment and education system so that every child, no matter their skills, their abilities, their aspirations, would find success in Edmonton Public Schools. He did start off with a 2020 cohort when he became superintendent. At the year 2020 was when those students would be graduating, and his goal was that 100% of kids would graduate from high school. And his big focus, in addition to inclusion, was about community engagement. And so you'll see we're starting to shift around empowerment. We went from principals to teachers to parents, to community, recognizing that collectively, again, we have that ownership for public education. And the outcomes that we achieved was our inclusive environment, greater alignment of community to our priority initiatives and our strategic plan for the district. And he did initiate, and this is an important piece, and I know David's going to talk about it in our keynote, a central services review and organization. When we started to notice that our culture had shifted to one of being toxic, again, we went back to empower and engage people. Bring them together, find out what's working, find out what's not working, and make decisions based on their input. And so that was a real significant thing that needed to happen in our district, and we intentionally brought people together to try to figure out how do we shift it back to where we want to be. And I know David will have some wonderful insights into that. So under the leadership of Edgar, you know, and I don't know what your system is like, but we were operating with systems in government operating in silos, which was actually kind of a not effective and efficient way of doing work. What his idea was is to put child well-being at the center and to wrap around, supports around a child and work in an integrated fashion to make sure that the success of the child was actually accomplished. And of course, you know, I put education bigger because that was the lens that we were focusing on it. But you know, someone from human services, their lens would be different. You know, and someone from health, their lens would be different. But it really was trying to create an organization where people work very collectively and strategically together. I, at that point in time, was a principal in a very high poverty area. And so it started to shift the way we thought about how we work with our students. And some of the things that we were, you know, when you have a focus on community engagement that we accomplished is we had a mentor, coordinator, and we had, in one of our schools, we had 168 one-on-one mentors for students that needed that one-on-one relationship. And so we couldn't offer that kind of in-depth, but the community could. And we found big brothers and big sisters that said, we'll join you. We had a family support worker and also a family therapist that was funded from health and Children and Youth Services, and they came in and they worked with families, you know, to help support them in educating their child. We also had a mental health nurse. That was a power of site-based decision making. I needed that in that building, and I could target my resources to bring in a mental health nurse to work with kids of trauma. We had a hot lunch and breakfast program, and you know, at the very core of it was we had a team that believed in working in partnership to help students and be successful. We needed a child welfare worker. We didn't quite accomplish that, but I'm sure it's probably in place now. And so some of, so lessons learned there, I must have missed that slide. We are down to our current superintendent, and that is Daryl Robertson. And some of the shifts that his big ideas is really about being a values-driven organization. And so we have worked hard to live and breathe our values of equity, collaboration, integrity, and accountability throughout our district. And I'm hoping that Lisa weaves some of her, you know, how that's actually living and playing itself out at a school level. He really, again, is about that social capital, believing that diversity in thought and perspective and opinion is necessary in trying to figure out how we move forward. And so engaging those people that can come together to collectively work around outcomes for kids. He really shifted his principle as community leader, being out there, working with the community, finding out what the needs and the aspirations and desires are, using that to inform us in our plans for moving forward and some of the issues that are challenging to us. He really believes in strategic planning, and that's part of my, role and responsibility. But we've taken now priorities that always have governed us, we've got vision, priorities, mission, values, as well as a very targeted strategic plan, so that our teachers and our principals know exactly where we're headed. We still have that notion of, you figure out your goals and what you want to achieve relative to that. We're not going to tell you how to do it, but we do have clear direction that's even more detailed than it has been in the past. And really a focus on success beyond schooling. And this is something new for us. We believe that we need and have a moral obligation to ensure the success of all students from early learning through to high school completion and beyond. And that notion about career pathways and creating opportunities for kids to, you know, enter into careers, you know, past high school completion that enable them to, you know, have dignity and fulfillment in life has been a huge component of his work. And so what are the outcomes? We are living our values. We really have become common direction, common focus from a systems level. We really are accountable to our public. Part of our, what we're doing with our strategic plan is creating an online dashboard. So we're developing metrics for each of our goals and our outcome statements. We are doing an online dashboard for our public to have an idea of how are we doing, and we're also developing an internal dashboard that is a little bit more detailed, that allows us to make evidence-based decision making. So we are really shifting from that accountability. We are moving from a me to we organization. In our, we'll talk about, we've established an equity fund. which really has principles. When we have surpluses, their dollars go to a fund, which really allows us to say, what schools need more? What children need more? And how can we utilize extra surplus dollars so that we recognize it's all our kids? You don't hoard your surplus dollars. You get to keep a little bit of them, but you know, people are very committed to helping out their colleagues because they know if they help their feeder schools, it's going to impact the final outcomes. And again, the equity fund and the career pathways are two initiatives that we have moving forward. So these are the final lessons learned, and then I'll hand it over to my colleagues. What are those transformational lessons learned? We need to have accountability structures in place. But we need to have flexibility. It's that tight ends, loose means for it to be flexible enough to adapt to local context and to facilitate risk-taking and empowerment at the school level. The principal as instructional leader is really critical. Evidence-based decision-making as we go forward. Power of collaboration and capacity building, need to we, equity, and success beyond schooling. So those are the transformative lessons that I believe are, helping us as we continue on our journey.